I am a hybrid shooter. I have been basically my whole career. Someone who shoots both photo and video on one device, and it can really do it all. Yeah, for the longest time, there were a lot of sacrifices, compromises. The codecs weren't great. The color wasn't great. You always had to find all these goofy workarounds to make it work right. Audio was a limitation for sure. But over the years, these hybrid cameras that shoot photo and video really well, that traditionally are meant for photography, but the DSLR revolution spun it all into video, and we got these great, amazing hybrids, have actually become incredibly powerful. 4K, 6K, 8K, open gate, 422, 10-bit, RAW in some instances, 60 frames, 120 frames, giant sensors. They can really do it all, aside from a few limitations here and there, things like overheating, or maybe you want specific inputs and outputs. You want SDI instead of HDMI, whatever it might be. But for the most part, hybrids are incredibly popular. But anytime I talk about hybrids and how good I want them to be, things like internal ND filters, more functionality, etc., someone always shows up to say, well, you should get a box camera, or we need something like the EVA1, we should see an EVA2. But before we get started, like this video, hit the subscribe button, and consider joining the channel. Channel members get exclusive access to Filmmaker Alchemy, behind-the-scenes lessons and insights on the business of video production. Learn how to turn your content into gold. So I kind of want to talk about that. Do we need an EVA2? And what happened to the EVA1? Funny enough, I was actually at Cinegear when they announced this camera, the EVA1, back in I think it was 2017. The price today, special order on B&H, is almost $7,000. I think when it came out, it was even more than that, which is pretty steep even by today's standards, but back then it was even more expensive, kind of outrageous. The EVA1 is a Super 35 sensor, so not full frame, didn't have good autofocus, but it had some decent features for the time and for what people wanted, but it wasn't quite perfect enough. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of times where these companies, they craft what is almost seemingly the perfect camera. It's got everything you could ever want. ND filters, inputs, outputs, 4K. It can even do, I think this can even do RAW in some situations, 10-bit 422 vlog. This looks great on paper. But there's like a handful of things, just a few little things, like the Achilles heel of the camera kind of takes away from it and ultimately ruins it. And I think at the time for the EVA1, it was the fact that it was Super 35 and it was the Canon EF mount, which is super odd for Panasonic to use, but also they had no other option. You see, this EVA1 came out after the AF100, an even older style boxy kind of camera, not truly a box, but you know what I mean, kind of that broadcast style, cinema style, boxy type of camera. The AF100 was micro four thirds, and I think a lot of people liked the AF100 and would have loved to see an AF200 or whatever they ended up calling it, but for some reason they never made it. And instead, they went with the EVA1 design, and they thought, ooh, we need a bigger sensor. Micro four thirds isn't big enough. We need something bigger. Let's put Super 35 in there. But oh shoot, we need a lens mount that can accommodate that style of shooting. And this is all before the L mount really kicked off. Maybe it existed somewhere on a Leica camera, but it certainly wasn't in Panasonic's playbook. They were exclusively micro four thirds for this type of camera. Yes, you had VariCam, which I believe is all PL mount from my understanding, but you had the EVA1, Canon EF mount. Well, if I'm shooting with EF glass, the whole point is, for a lot of people, is that you could get full frame. Something like the 5D Mark II, the Mark III, the Mark IV, these were all full frame cameras. And if I'm shooting with EF glass, like the L series glass, back in the day, usually you want it on a full frame camera. Yes, there's EFS, I believe is the designation for the cropped sensor lenses, but I don't think anyone shooting with EF lenses was super excited about Super 35, and also the price point. This was at a time where, the Ursa Mini, Blackmagic, they were making all sorts of waves with low price point cinema cameras. And here comes Panasonic with something that was insanely expensive for anyone who wanted to upgrade from the GH line. So if you're a Lumix shooter, at the time I would have been shooting maybe like the GH4, I think at the time, 2017, maybe right around the GH5 time. I'm getting my dates and cameras all mixed up in my head at the moment. But, trying to get someone to upgrade, someone who had spent $1,500 or $2,000 on a hybrid body, you're going to ask them to pay like $8,000, I think was the price point at the time to just get a totally different lens mount. None of the Micro Four Thirds lenses would work. And JVC was also making the LS300. I believe that's what that camera's called. That was Micro Four Thirds, but had a Super 35, or maybe even, Super 35 sensor. So that was kind of an interesting anomaly also happening at the time. Is this weird stage in the industry where hybrids were becoming more and more popular, but there was still this appetite for the more expensive stuff. Canon was doing their cinema line, which they ultimately perfected, I think, with the C500 Mark II. That's an incredible camera in terms of specs and usability. Granted, it's the EF mount, and they've shifted all the way to, they've shifted everything to RF mount, but the C500 Mark II is awesome. And I think you can actually buy them now cheaper than what you can get an EVA-1 for. I don't think the EVA-1 was as popular as it needed to be because of those few crippling features. The EF mount just wasn't the right fit at the time, but I don't know what the right fit would have been. Do you do PL? That doesn't really make sense. You do EF, but now you have to have a bigger sensor to really be competitive in the full frame mirrorless world. And that's the other thing. It's not a mirrorless mount. So you can't really have the same adaptability that you get with something like the GH lineup or even what Sony was doing at the time with the E-mount. All those mirrorless mounts, far more adaptable than being stuck with a Canon EF mount. You also don't really have things like good autofocus, which was starting to gain traction at the time. Really good autofocus. Yeah, they hyped up things like good low light. Hey, it can shoot, I think it can do 5.7K RAW, and it's got your inputs, outputs, built-in NDs. It's got some decent stuff on paper, but it just wasn't really enough. And it was kind of the wrong combination of ingredients. So an EVA-2 maybe could fix a lot of those things. Maybe it would be wise for Panasonic to roll out an EVA-2 with the L mount, because now all of a sudden we've got a mirrorless mount, full frame sensor. Certainly it would need to be a full frame sensor. And we've seen how good these full frame sensors have become, how fast they are, still good dynamic range, still good in low light. But you give it the L mount, you invest there, you make sure it has phase detect, good autofocus. You give it the built-in NDs. You get all your inputs and outputs. You keep stabilization in there as well. That's another important thing. IBIS, of course. Combine all these and give you something like an EVA-2. Yeah, I could see that being successful as long as the price point is competitive. You can't roll that out for 20 grand and expect people to buy it, even though you might be looking at the market and saying, well, Sony's got the Burano and that's pretty expensive, so we're gonna compete with that. I don't know. I think to earn the customers, you have to offer them immense value and actually give them a little bit of a discount if you're trying to make your way into the market, launching something like that. Sony has been incredibly successful rolling out a bunch of cameras at all different price points, all different feature sets. And no wonder is that they've actually been successful with that. They become quite popular. And there's a lot of people, once they buy into the camera bodies, they start buying lenses. Now they're stuck with E-mount because they've invested in it. So they're just looking for the next E-mount camera to come by and be better than the last. If you're trying to launch something like an EVA-2, it could work, but it has to be that perfect right set of ingredients. It can't be missing something too critical or be compromised by some poor decision behind the scenes where, on paper you think it all should work out, but the EVA-1 just didn't work. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who like it, who bought it, who would love to see a follow-up, but it didn't have the mass appeal that you probably would want for something like this. Enough people have to buy it for it to pay for itself, pay for that investment. Maybe they did make a profit. I have no idea over at Panasonic how the EVA-1 worked, but do I think we'll see an EVA-2? Chances are not. They tend to do these random releases. I think of things like the AF100, and that's all we ever got. And for some reason, they released a DVX200 randomly years and years after the DVX100, trying these experimental somewhat of, it's an upgrade from a hybrid, but it's not really a cinema camera, but it's also not a broadcast camera. I don't know. I think this type of camera could work for documentary style filmmakers, wedding filmmakers, anyone who does that kind of multi-purpose production could benefit from a camera like this, but it can't be too expensive because then you're just going to default back to the hybrid, what's been working. If you want the extra features, and you probably are willing to pay for them, but you're not going to pay that heavy of a premium because it just doesn't make sense at the end of the day when everyone's trying to make money doing their job. So there's room for it, you're not going to see it on like a film set, and you're not going to see it in a YouTuber's bedroom. It's an interesting type of model and could work, but it really needs to thread that needle of having all those right features that check all those boxes in a way that makes sense, that is an easy upgrade from a hybrid shooter. So let's say, you are excited about the S5 Mark II or the S1 Mark II or the S1R Mark II, all these great full frame L mount cameras. You've got L glass and you're looking for that. Okay, what's that reach? What's that step up? It could be something like an EVA2 or a true box style camera, a BS1H Mark II, something like that, which we'll probably make another video talking about. But there is that room for that step up, that path to upgrade. And I think it ought to be there, but those steps have to be moderate. They can't be too big of a step in price point, in size, in weight. But I do think it's a valid option if they get it right. And I don't think it takes away from those hybrids either, because both are valuable to different types of shooters. You have people who want to take photos. You're not going to take photos with an EVA1 or an EVA2 if it looked similar to this. It's just not the case, right? It's not the type of camera that's good at taking pictures. Hybrids, photography cameras that can take photos, as we've always done, with the shutter, that can also shoot video, super valuable if that's what you want to focus on. If you want to lean more into the video side, more into the broadcast, more into cinema, maybe documentary, maybe you do go with something like this and you sacrifice it. But that sacrifice of not being able to take photos anymore, all of a sudden, you're weighing it. I'm paying more to have less usability. Okay, it doesn't overheat. Okay, it's got SDI. Hey, it's got built-in NDs. Maybe that's worth it. But I think the market for this is actually quite small. So the amount of people who are even interested in a camera like this is smaller than hybrids. I think hybrids are the most popular for good reason. They're affordable, they're easy to use, and you can use them for pretty much anything. So that's mass appeal, huge market, lots of customers ready to buy your product. All of a sudden you start shifting towards this style of camera. Now you're already limiting who it appeals to. Your demographic shrinks in terms of the amount of people. And if you don't get those features right, all of a sudden that small market just doesn't bite. It doesn't catch on. And I think that's what happened with the EVA1. Cool concept, probably deserved a follow-up that was more refined, but we just never saw it. And I don't know if we'll ever see an EVA2, but it is fun to think about, fun to talk about. Let me know what your wish list for an EVA2 would be, because for me, it would be pretty much what they're doing with the hybrids, just put it in a little slightly bigger box camera like this. And yeah, make those people happy. They are out there. Plenty of people want this type of camera, not necessarily for me, but they do exist. However, you got to get it right. You got to make sure that every one of those features is the perfect complement to the camera itself, a holistic camera. The EVA1 was kind of disjointed. And it also has to make sense in the overall ecosystem of the lens mount and other cameras on the market. Sony has done quite well in that regard, and I would love to see Panasonic do the same. It's interesting, Canon, who had the greatest lineup for the longest time with EF mount, it kind of is weird. It's kind of a hodgepodge now what they're doing with RF mount, but that's a whole other story. If Panasonic were to come out with an EVA2 or some other alternate name, what would you like to see? Let me know. I would be happy to read it in the comments.